Christos anesti. Christ is risen.
He is truly risen.
My dear brothers and sisters, like I said at the beginning of Mass, this indeed is a strange Easter. I mean, think about it. We are Americans. We live in a country where it's pretty easy to get to Mass almost every Sunday. None of us have ever experienced something like this. About 74 years ago, a young deacon preparing for his ordination, this deacon named Charles, had just spent a very strange Easter under an occupying army. And actually, he had just spent 6 very strange Easters under first one occupying army and then another. And then after his ordination to the priesthood, he would spend another 32 strange Easters under this same occupying power. And during this time, he actually spent 162 days sheltering in place. Actually, even more strict than that, a quarantine or under heavy lockdown. I'm sure our Polish brothers, and maybe many of the rest of you understand and know who I'm talking about, right? St. John Paul II. St. John Paul II, having to spend those 162 days especially, because what had happened, as the city of Krakow was getting ready to be quote-unquote liberated from the Nazis by the Red Army, John Paul II realized the Nazis were rounding up every young man in the city and either killing them, driving them out of the city, or forcing them into the German army because they didn't want an uprising like happened in Warsaw. John Paul hid in his uncle's basement for a night, then knocked on the door of the archbishop, and there he didn't leave that house. Socially isolated, quarantined, sheltering in place, whatever you want to call it, for 162 days. Yet this same man, the same seminarian who experienced so much trauma, so many bad Easters, so horrible things in these quarantines, nonetheless could come onto St. Peter's Square in 1978 and say to a Catholic world that was still trying to figure out what was going on after Vatican II, and say to the Catholic world the same words we heard the angel speak to Mary last night: do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. He had a lot to be afraid of. The constant threat of bullets, the constant threat of starvation, disease, atheist communists trying to mess with his head. Nonetheless, do not be afraid. That great crisis of World War II and then the Red Terror forged him to be the man that he was and to lead the church and to not be afraid. Now, John Paul II was part of what we call now the greatest generation, My grandparents belonged to this generation. They were the ones who grew up during the Great Depression and the ones who saved the world during World War II. Many of them are still with us today, although many of them have gone to the Lord. Now, many psychologists might say, okay, they're forged in this sort of great crisis, and it caused them to be the people that they are. I would say there's something else. There's another aspect of that generation, the greatest generation, my grandparents' generation, that is great. Their faith. Their faith. I think of my own great uncle who crash-landed in the waters of the Pacific, shark-infested waters during World War II, and waited there for several days to be picked up, while many of his people died of thirst or craziness. I guarantee you, he never missed daily Mass after that, right? He never missed daily Mass. As soon as he got back, he was in church all the time. This generation, the great generation, most of whom would never think about missing Sunday Mass. Because in the midst of the crisis, they learned how to rely on God. Like I said, at last night's vigil, we heard those words, the angel speaking to Mary Magdalene, do not be afraid. And the joy that they felt when they saw that tomb on Easter morning. Then we hear today that first reading from the Acts of the Apostles after Pentecost. Who's preaching? Peter. He's the guy who just 2 days ago we heard deny him 3 times. The scaredy man afraid of his own shadow. And the rest of those 12 apostles, scared men, run at the sign of danger except for St. John. Well, the only reason he had the courage there, of course, because the Blessed Mother. Nonetheless, those apostles, except for St. John and Judas, those other 10 would go on to become martyrs. The scared men suddenly were not afraid. And the saints throughout the world, from the first apostles to the prince of the apostles, John Paul the Great, have been the same, not afraid. Why? Brothers and sisters, like I said, this is indeed a very, very strange Easter. Easter's a day when any person who claims the name Christian seeks a place to worship, right? And we know that those who normally would be in their houses on Sunday morning are out. Their houses are empty and our churches packed. I remember fondly the days of St. Dominic's in San Francisco, having to step over the people because there were so many people in the side aisles, the thousands crowding into our great church, and just being charged up with a great energy because we, the priests of the Lord, the order of preachers, surrounded by our flock, surrounded by all those people from the great city of St. Francis coming to worship the Lord. Houses empty, churches full. Today it's the opposite. Today everybody is sheltering in place. Today our churches, except for a few priests and a few servers or a few religious, are empty. Now, whether our churches be full or empty, whether our houses be full or empty, one thing is always empty: the tomb. The tomb. If we go to the most holy place in all of Christendom, what do we find? Nothing. An empty room. Brothers and sisters, the reason this is because it's all true. We heard our prior preach last night. The resurrection is not some sort of myth of our religion. It is not some sort of one more story that's told. It is not some event that was meaningful for the people in the past. It is something that actually happened. And the people, the apostles, knew about mythical language. They knew about these sorts of things. No, this is written, and they knew how strange their story was. Nonetheless, it is all true. Peter was bold, Mary Magdalene filled with joy, John Paul II in the face of unspeakable evil, all saying, "Be not afraid." All of that because of the resurrection. So then, brothers and sisters, like we said last night, this is something that is very, very real. And if it were not real, if there would be a body in that tomb, if Christ had not truly risen from the dead, our faith would be in vain. Again, as the prior said last night, terrorists can kill the body. COVID-19 can kill the body. But bad theology can kill your soul. Brothers and sisters, nothing can kill your soul if you have faith in Christ. It's very real. And not only that, I'm staking my life on it. But what about us? I belong to the order of preachers. I like to make bold statements. I like to preach boldly. I like to tell everybody, let's go out, let's be courageous, let's go run. But I don't know about you, brothers and sisters, but this past Lent, this lentiest of Lents, as we're saying, I've had a lot of periods where I've been really afraid. I've actually had a lot of time that I felt like a real coward in the face of all this. I thought, man, here I am preaching all the things, thinking that I'm going to be bold, and there I am, no better than Peter, no better than the rest of those scaredy men. I'm afraid of dying. I worry about our country. I worry about those with health compromising who might die. I worry about those in my own community. I worry about those who have lost their jobs. I worry about those who are going to be really suffering for years to come because of this crash. And I worry, and I worry, and I worry, and I worry. I'm also sorrowful. It takes a huge emotional toll to be quarantined, even if you're quarantined with a bunch of really awesome Dominicans. It takes a huge emotional toll. I've talked to so many of my friends via live stream, via Zoom, via Facebook, and via all the things, right? And they tell me the same thing. And of course, the biggest thing they're sorrowful about, they can't receive the sacraments. For you, my brothers and sisters who might be joining us on live stream, our heart really does go out to you. We've heard your voice. We know and we feel it in your hearts, having to be away from the sacraments which you love so much. It does take a great toll. I'm hearing that. Not only that, for brother priests, it's taken a large toll on us as well, right? A priest should never be without his flock. We can celebrate sacraments, and of course the sacraments have great efficacy even if we're celebrating them alone, but they're celebrated for the people of God. And ultimately, if we can't have people coming, in a certain sense, there's a lack. And we're feeling that lack. We're feeling that lack. And a priest is like a fish out of water without his flock. We saw the Pope so sorrowful 2 weeks ago when he embraced the miraculous cross and when he took out the Eucharist to bless the city and the world. I'll admit it, my brothers, my sisters. During these past few weeks, I've been crying a lot. I've been crying a lot over the sorrow in the world, over our situation, and because I miss my flock. We do miss you, brothers and sisters. We look forward to the day when we can come back together. So what are we to do? How are we to reconcile Easter joy with the sorrow we feel right now, trying to overcome this terrible virus? Well, first of all, we need to look to the future generations, right, brothers and sisters? We need to look to the future generations. We need to think of those biographies of saints that are going to be written 200 years from now. They're going to say she was kind of a lukewarm Catholic, never really took her faith, and all of a sudden she came face to face with death with this COVID-19 outbreak, and she started going to daily Mass as soon as she could, and she never stopped. For those of you who are joining us who have young families, a big thing here. Your children and your grandchildren will remember this. Years from now, when your children are priests or sisters, or when they're grandparents themselves, they'll talk about the fact that their parents cried, that their parents were sorrowful because they could not receive the sacraments. And they'll say, you know, this showed us at a very early age how important this was, and that we would never think about missing Sunday Mass because it is such a precious treasure. No doubt this crisis indeed is helping to forge the next generation of saints. But what about us in the meantime? As we continue the shelter in place, brothers and sisters, I want to end my homily going back to John Paul II. John Paul II died during the Easter octave, which is the week we're in, this coming week. And he died on the vigil of something called Divine Mercy Sunday. And the reading that we read always in Divine Mercy Sunday is where we believe, as Catholics, that the Lord gave the authority to forgive sins to the apostles. And we believe that that divine mercy coming from the cross and emanating from the cross. John Paul II promoted this devotion. And if we think about the image of the divine mercy at the very bottom, that simple phrase, Jesus, I trust in you. This has brought me great comfort in this, the middle of the Lentiest of Lents. And now as we move into the joyful Easter season, as I'm praying my novena to Divine Mercy, it gives me comfort too. When I'm afraid and freaked out and thinking the world is going to end, Jesus, I trust in you. When I'm worried about my family and friends, my cousins who I love so much, Jesus, I trust in you. When I worry about our economy, our future, all of our plans, all the things we've got together, Jesus, I trust in you. We trust. We trust that that tomb is empty. We trust that Jesus did not leave us orphans back then, and he will not do so now. Let us then be that generation of saints that turns back to the Lord now and that takes great hope in heaven. Ultimately, let us be a great generation. A great generation not because we've defeated COVID-19, but because we're a generation of saints. A generation of saints because Christ is risen and because the tomb is empty and we can go to heaven now to become saints. Christos anesti. Christ is risen.
He is truly risen.
Praise be Jesus Christ.